Hello, today I'm joined by Howard from FairFuelUK. How are you today, Howard?
Very well indeed, thank you.
It's been a while since we spoke. I asked you off camera whether you've made any progress. It looks like you have, actually.
Well, we've been, in the last 9 years, we've managed to secure a freeze in fuel duty. It's the longest freeze in any of the government levies. So we're quite proud of that, and we've saved £100 billion worth of tax being paid by drivers, and they would have been paying £1.70 to £1.80 at the pump. So yes, we're quite pleased with that, but we're still paying the highest in the world.
I mean, being cynical about it, that's the issue. That the reason that maybe the government doesn't mind a freeze is because it should be rather lower than freeze on duty rather is rather low than it should be.
You're right. You're quite right to say that, but I think you should also recognise just before the budget he held in October a month ago or so, I was assured that Philip Hammond was going to put the tax up. Definitely, to help finance the NHS. He wants to put some money from drivers into 20 billion of new funding to the NHS. But as you know, the Prime Minister decided to stand up at the Tory conference and actually snubbed the Chancellor by revealing that the freeze is going to continue. I was told a few days beforehand that was going to happen because we were prepared to. We had 71,000 emails to hit the of people to email the Chancellor to say he shouldn't do it. We had a CBR report that showed that the reason for the fuel duty, the benefit of the fuel duty, because he unfortunately told everyone at the dispatch box that there's 46 billion of lost tax increases to the Exchequer. Well, that's completely a lie. We got the CBR to investigate this, and if we'd had what's called the fuel price escalator, in other words, if we hadn't had the price freeze, the fuel duty freeze, inflation would have been 6.6%. The cost of goods leaving the manufacturer's gates would have been about 7%. All sorts of factors showing that the freeze has done wonders for the economy.
Right, I mean, you've obviously done very well on that. I think to get any tax staying the same rather than going up is great. But I mean, just remind us what's on a litre. What's the percentage of tax on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it varies. Obviously, depends the percentage because it depends on the oil price. But something like 65% of what goes into your tank is tax. And one of the galling things which my supporters, and we've got nearly 2 million supporters now, they get really upset with is the fact there's VAT on the duty itself. So there's a double taxation. Those sorts of things. But we still are the highest taxed, certainly for diesel in the world. Petrol about the 5th in the world. I mean, we're talking 200 countries there, and it's wrong because we've proven yet again in various economic reports to show that cutting duty, and even the government agree with that. They issued a report in 2014 that showed that cutting fuel duty is good for jobs, good for wages, and good for GDP. But they still look at it, the drivers, as a great cash cows.
Well, just a slight side issue, but I mean, there are a lot of lobby groups out there lobbying for everything or anything. Why does the government actually listen to you?
Well, because there's 37 million drivers, and that's 80% of the electorate, and the whole of the economy, the commercial heartbeat is the trucker. I mean, 90% of everything that's delivered, or in this office, in this studio, anywhere in your home, arrived on a truck, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, they've got to realise that you can't tax drivers more and more and more when what other tax is 65% except smoking, which actually does damage health. Driving, doesn't damage health. It gets people socially, community, all sorts of things. Going to work, going to school, going to college. It is a necessary thing, particularly in rural areas where public transport is so poor.
The other thing is, I mean, let's say the fuel duty went up in order to improve roads and the way traffic flows. Would you welcome that?
Well, that's an interesting question because only 18% of the £50 billion a year drivers give to the Exchequer, and that's every year. Only 80% of that goes back into roads. 90% of all journeys are by road, for example, and only 10% by...
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, you mentioned the NHS. If we knew that there was another 5% added on, road fuel duty went to the NHS, presumably people wouldn't actually mind paying that. And the same thing with if the roads were improved, and there were maybe actually at the moment there were less cycle lanes in London, which people actually don't use at all or barely use. That's another issue. It does seem to me another issue is that it suits the government that we are stuck in traffic jams. The more traffic jams there are, the more fuel we use and the more duty they get.
It's a question of priority. I mean, no one minds paying more money for the NHS. All our supporters would agree with that. But what about why is Facebook or Google, why are they not paying proper taxes in this country? Why are we paying overseas aid to China and India to support football teams or building a £300 million statue in India? Those sorts of things. It's a priority thing. We are already the highest tax motorists in the world. We don't need to tax them anymore. What we need to do is incentivise drivers to move to cleaner fuels, for example. That would make sense. And those are the sorts of things that we're pushing very hard now. I mean,
but the government might not like cleaner fuels because then they wouldn't be able to charge so much duty on them.
Well, I'm afraid they will find a way to tax anything. I mean, we're talking about cliff edge targets of 2030 and 2040 in terms of all of us moving over to electric cars, which is completely naive beyond belief. But they will look at this, and we are actually going to be running a conference which will bring all of the major people together, including ministers, to ask the question of the future of road pricing. So your question is very right. How are they going to secure that 50 billion that's coming in every year now in other ways of taxing people using roads?
Right, I was just trying to make a sideward glance at Sadiq Khan with the cycle lanes, which nobody uses, and just block traffic. He's also worth mentioning in terms of diesel, isn't he? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's a year now we've had this new toxic tax. We've had the congestion charge for 20 years nearly, but a year ago he introduced the toxic tax, and we'll be coming out with a press release shortly, and you can have it exclusively here at the moment, that shows that the toxic tax hasn't reduced or improved air quality. All it's done is get him £300 million more for his coffers. So what's so sad about the policy, and a lot of other urban cities across the country are looking at this, is that you're allowed to bring a dirty vehicle in, a really old dirty vehicle, provided you give him money. He doesn't ban you. We call it a pay to pollute policy, which is stupid, when there are solutions out there which will clean up our air without hurting people in the pocket.
Well, to be fair, he does actually need more money because his budget's gone up by 60%, so he's got to cover the costs somehow.
Yeah, so good old drivers hit them hard, and we're looking at towns like Leeds and some other towns across the country that a trucker doing his business and delivering, it's going to cost £100 to come into the centre of ultra low emission zones areas. It's completely naive because that cost will be passed on to you and I. So what we need to see is a joined up thinking, motivate people to go to cleaner fuels without actually hitting them in the pocket.
Right, so you're here with your, I suppose it's a lap of honour. Getting the freeze is a lap of honour. What's next, and what's your outlook?
Well, it's three things. We're still going to fight for a cut in fuel duty, not just a freeze. We are still paying too much because that would incentivise the economy. Secondly, we're also looking at the other side of things, the other 35%, the commercial side, because you probably know oil prices fell in the last 6 weeks by something like 30%, but pump prices haven't fallen by that much. So we're looking for an independent body. We've got it for Ofcom, we've got it for gas, electric, or, the Ofgem, Oftel, all these sorts of bodies that keep an eye on fair pricing. Well, we haven't got that for pumps. The fuel supply chain is an opaque process of pricing, because what happens is that when oil goes up, we've got no idea if it goes up $2 or $3, what that means at the pumps in a week or two. If it comes down by $2 or $3, we know it's never going to come down by as much as it would have gone up. So we want to introduce a thing called Pump Watch, or off pump is what but we've moved it to Pump Watch because we think that's a good way of doing it. And the other thing we're fighting on is this thing about alternative ways of cleaning our air. Every driver wants clean air. It's a myth that they're all gas guzzlers and they don't care. They have to go to work, they've got no choice. What we want to see is actually the government adopting, and they've shut the door on these solutions. There's a solution, for example, in the USA, where it's a legal requirement to have this additive in bulk deliveries to garages, and that reduces NOx, CO2, and improves miles per gallon. It's a fantastic thing, but instead our wonderful local authorities and Michael Gove, all they care about is fleecing people in the pockets.
Well, that's a wonderful way to end. Howard from FairFuelUK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.